The screaming started at dawn, which was when Kai Devereaux knew they'd failed. He pressed his back against the cold concrete wall of the observation tower, his breath forming small clouds in the October air, and watched as the eastern barricade collapsed under the weight of 300 rotting bodies. The sound was like timber snapping, followed by the hungry moans that had become the soundtrack of humanity's twilight. Below him, in the courtyard of what used to be Riverside Industrial Complex, 47 survivors scrambled for weapons they'd hoped never to use again. Kai had counted them yesterday during the evening ration distribution. By nightfall he knew that number would be smaller. The infection had swept across the globe in 96 days, turning major cities into mass graves and reducing human civilization to scattered pockets of terrified survivors. Kai had been a high school history teacher in the before time, a detail that felt absurdly irrelevant now as he chambered a round into his rifle and prepared to make history rather than teach it. The Riverside Complex, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of what had been Seattle, had been home for 2 months. They'd reinforced the walls, established supply routes, planted a garden in the loading bay. They dared to hope. Hope, Kai had learned, was the most dangerous weapon against despair but also the most fragile. Kai, we need you in the command center now. The voice crackled through his radio, belonging to Zara Okonkwo, the microbiologist who'd become their de facto strategist. Her Nigerian accent carried an edge of controlled panic that made Kai's stomach clench. Zara never panicked. She was the one who'd figured out the zombies' movement patterns, their attraction to sound frequencies, their decreased activity in extreme cold. If Zara was afraid, they were in worse trouble than the broken barricade suggested. Kai descended the tower stairs 3 at a time, his boots clanging against metal grating. The courtyard was organized chaos. Mikhail Volkov, the former Russian Special Forces operative, was directing people into defensive positions with sharp hand signals and economical movements. Mikhail's face was a roadmap of old scars, each one a story he'd never told, but his eyes were clear and focused. Near the medical station, Indira Chakravarti was already treating the first injured, a young woman who'd been too close to the barricade when it fell. Indira's hands moved with practiced efficiency, her doctor's instincts overriding the fear that Kai could see in the tightness around her eyes. The command center was located in the factory's old supervisor office, its windows now covered with steel plates and monitoring equipment salvaged from a Best Buy 3 miles north. Zara stood over a table covered in hand-drawn maps, her dark fingers tracing routes and defensive lines. Beside her, Thorne Blackwood, their elected leader, looked 10 years older than he had at yesterday's council meeting. Thorne had been a city councilman before, someone who'd made decisions about parking regulations and zoning laws. Now he made decisions about who lived and who died, and the weight of it was crushing him visibly. "They're coming from 3 directions," Zara said without preamble, her British-accented English clipped and precise. The eastern breach was a diversion. "We've got 2 larger groups approaching from the north and south. Someone estimated 500 each, maybe more. They're coordinating." "Zombies don't coordinate," Thorne said, but his voice lacked conviction. They'd all seen things in the past months that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the infected. "These ones do," Kai said quietly, remembering reports from other settlements, the few radio contacts they still maintained. "We've heard about this. The longer they survive, the more they adapt. Pack hunting. Basic problem solving. They're evolving." Saoirse Quinn, their chief engineer, burst through the door, her red hair wild and her freckled face flushed. The Irish woman had kept their generators running, their water filtration working, their entire infrastructure functional. "The south wall won't hold," she said bluntly. "I need 3 hours and 10 people to reinforce it. We have neither." Thorne looked around at all of them, these people who'd become leaders by necessity rather than choice, and Kai saw the moment the decision crystallized in his eyes. "Then we evacuate," Thorne said. "We take what we can carry and we run." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Run where? Run to what? But nobody asked those questions because they all knew there were no good answers, only different ways to delay the inevitable. The next 30 minutes moved with the frantic efficiency of a choreographed nightmare. Kai had helped develop the Exodus Protocol 3 weeks ago, a contingency plan nobody wanted to implement. Now he moved through the compound with a clipboard, checking off supplies while around him people stuffed backpacks with canned goods, medical supplies, ammunition, and the small personal items that connected them to their lost lives. He saw Elio Navarro, a 17-year-old scout with quick reflexes and quicker wit, carefully wrapping a photograph of his family in plastic before tucking it inside his jacket. The boy's parents and younger sister were somewhere in the shambling hordes outside. Elio never talked about them, but Kai had seen him staring at that photograph countless times during the quiet moments between crises. Mikhail had organized the evacuation into 3 groups: vanguard, main body, and rear guard. He assigned himself to the rear, naturally, along with the 6 best fighters they had. It was a suicide detail and everyone knew it. Someone had to slow the horde while the others escaped, and Mikhail made that calculation with the same cold pragmatism he applied to everything. Kai watched him checking ammunition counts, distributing spare magazines, and explaining firing patterns to people who'd been accountants and baristas and college students just months ago. War made soldiers of them all, whether they wanted it or not. Zara worked with a tablet she'd rigged to a car battery, pulling up satellite images from before the internet died and plotting their route. "There's a state park 40 miles northwest," she explained to the group leaders clustered around her. "Heavily forested, multiple water sources, defensible terrain. We scouted it last month but decided it was too remote. Remote is what we need now." Her finger traced the route, mostly back roads and hiking trails that the main zombie concentrations would avoid. The undead tended to cluster around former population centers, some residual memory or instinct drawing them to where humans had been, might be again. Indira was making impossible decisions about medical supplies. They had 3 people in the infirmary too injured to move easily, including old Marcus Chin, who'd broken his leg falling from a ladder while repairing the roof 2 days ago. Marcus was conscious and aware, and when Indira approached his cot, he shook his head before she could speak. "I know, Doc," he said in Cantonese accented English, his weathered face calm. "You leave me enough morphine, I'll be fine. I'll slow them down, buy you time." His hand was steady when he reached out to pat hers. "I'm 73 years old. I've had a good run. Let me make it count for something." Indira's composure cracked then, tears streaming down her face as she nodded and began preparing a syringe with more morphine than anyone would need for pain management. Kai looked away, his throat tight. This was the arithmetic of survival. Calculating value, weighing lives, making choices that would haunt them in whatever quiet moments the future held. The zombies reached the north wall as they were loading the last supplies onto the vehicles: 2 trucks, a reinforced bus, and 3 SUVs that represented their entire motor pool. The sound of hands slapping against metal, of nails scraping and teeth gnashing, echoed through the compound. Thorne stood on the hood of the lead truck, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "We've survived this long by staying together," he called out. "We keep doing that. Nobody gets left behind unless they choose it. We move fast, stay quiet, and we live to fight another day. The human race doesn't end here. Not today." It was a good speech, Kai thought, even if the tremor in Thorne's voice undermined its confidence. People needed to hear it anyway. They needed something to believe in besides the gnawing fear that maybe humanity's clock had already run out, that they were just the last few grains of sand refusing to fall. Saoirse fired up the lead truck's engine, the sound momentarily drowning out the moans from beyond the walls. Kai climbed into the bus, rifle slung across his back, and began helping people aboard. Families clutched children who'd learned not to cry, who understood that silence meant survival. Young couples held hands with white-knuckled intensity. Elderly survivors moved with grim determination, refusing to be anyone's burden. 47 people had been in the compound yesterday. 41 were evacuating. 6 had chosen to stay behind. The 3 injured, Marcus Chin among them, and 3 volunteers who decided that dying on their feet, buying time for others, was better than dying on the run. The south gate opened, and their convoy rolled out into a world painted in shades of gray and decay. The first 5 miles were deceptively quiet, and that made Kai more nervous than if they'd been fighting for every yard. The convoy moved in tight formation along Highway 18, a 2-lane road cutting through what had been farmland. Abandoned cars lined the shoulders like a metal graveyard, their windows dark and their doors hanging open from long-ago panic. Fields that should have been harvested stood wild and overgrown, nature reclaiming the spaces humanity had surrendered. Kai rode in the bus, positioned near a window he'd reinforced with wire mesh, his rifle ready and his eyes scanning the tree line. Elio sat across from him, the teenager's leg bouncing with nervous energy despite his otherwise calm demeanor. The boy had proven himself valuable as a scout, his slight build and natural agility allowing him to slip through spaces others couldn't navigate. He'd saved 6 people in the last month alone by spotting threats before they materialized into disaster. "It's too quiet," Elio said, his Spanish accent thickening slightly the way it always did when he was stressed. "They should be following us. The noise from the engines, they should be swarming." Zara, seated nearby with her tablet and a hand-drawn journal, looked up sharply. "Unless they're being drawn somewhere else," she said slowly, her mind clearly working through possibilities. The volunteers staying behind, they were supposed to create a diversion, draw the horde deeper into the compound. But if the zombies ignored that diversion... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. If the undead had ignored the easy prey at the compound in favor of tracking the convoy, it meant a level of strategic thinking that terrified everyone who understood the implications. Evolution happened slowly in nature, over generations. But the zombie infection seemed to accelerate it, each wave of infected showing slightly more cognitive function than the last. How long before they started using tools? Planning ambushes? Opening doors? The radio crackled to life, Mikhail's accented voice cutting through the static. "Rear guard to convoy leader. We have movement approximately 200 meters behind. Fast movers, minimum 30 count." Fast movers? The term they developed for zombies that could still run, the freshly turned whose muscles hadn't yet deteriorated into the shambling gait of the older infected. They were the most dangerous, retaining enough coordination to climb, jump, and chase down fleeing prey. Thorne's response was immediate. "All vehicles increase speed. Maintain formation. If they catch up to rear guard, we stop and fight." The convoy accelerated, engines roaring as they pushed 40, then 50 miles per hour. Too fast for safety on these deteriorating roads, but slower than the death chasing them. Kai watched through the rear window as Mikhail's vehicle, a modified pickup truck with reinforced sides, began to fall behind. 3 people rode in the back, their rifles aimed at the pursuing horde that was now visible as a dark mass against the pale morning sky. Muzzle flashes sparked in the growing distance as they opened fire, and even through the bus's windows, Kai could hear the distinctive crack of controlled shots. Mikhail was choosing his targets carefully, dropping the fastest runners, trying to slow the pack. Then the road curved and Kai lost sight of them. The convoy pushed forward, every mile a small victory. They passed through the husk of a small town, Ravensdale according to a faded sign, where zombies clustered in front of what had been a church. The undead turned toward the sound of engines, lurching into the street, but the reinforced vehicles simply plowed through them, bodies crumpling under wheels with sickening wet sounds that Kai knew would echo in his nightmares. A child zombie, no more than 6 years old with blonde pigtails matted with blood, bounced off the bus's front bumper. Someone on the bus whimpered. Someone else was sick in a bucket they kept for exactly this purpose. 10 miles out, Mikhail's voice returned to the radio, slightly breathless. "Lost them in a bottleneck at the river crossing. Collapsed a bridge after we crossed. That should buy us time." Relief rippled through the bus, people exhaling tension they'd been holding in their shoulders and chests. But the celebration was premature. As they approached mile marker 15, Saoirse's panicked voice erupted from the radio. "Roadblock ahead. Looks deliberate, vehicles positioned to funnel traffic. This isn't zombie work, this is human." The convoy slowed and Kai felt his pulse quicken for a different reason. They'd encountered other survivors before, and the meetings ranged from cautiously cooperative to violently hostile. Resources were scarce, trust was scarcer, and desperation made monsters of the living as effectively as any virus. The roadblock consisted of 3 vehicles arranged in a V formation, forcing anyone passing through into a narrow channel. On either side, figures emerged from the tree line, 12 people, all armed, all pointing weapons at the convoy. They looked haggard, their clothes dirty and their faces gaunt with hunger, but their guns were clean and their formation suggested military training or at least careful planning. A man stepped forward, rifle held ready but not quite aimed. He was tall, with a shaved head and a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat effect of someone who'd stopped caring about niceties. "We don't want trouble," he called out. "But we need supplies. Food, medicine, ammunition. Give us half of what you're carrying and you can pass. Refuse and we take it all." Thorne emerged from the lead truck slowly, his hands visible and empty, playing the role of reasonable leader even though Kai could see the calculation in his eyes. Behind the windows of the bus, people clutched children tighter, and Kai saw Indira quietly preparing her medical bag as if anticipating casualties. The standoff stretched across the highway, Two desperate groups of survivors weighing violence against survival. We're carrying 41 people, Thorne said, his voice steady despite the rifles pointed at his chest. Mostly families, children, elderly. We just lost our settlement to a horde. Half our supplies means some of us don't eat for the next week. You're asking us to choose who starves. The scarred man's expression didn't change. And we've got 23 people who haven't eaten in 3 days. The warehouse we were staying in got overrun 4 days ago. We've been on the road since then. You're asking us to just let food drive past while our kids die. He gestured to the group behind him, and Kai could see he wasn't exaggerating. There were children among them, their eyes hollow with hunger, their limbs thin in a way that spoke of prolonged deprivation. Zara appeared beside Thorne, her analytical mind clearly searching for a solution that didn't end in bloodshed. "Where are you headed?" she asked the scarred man. "Because if we're going in the same direction, there's another option. We combine resources, combine groups. Strength in numbers. We're heading to Cascade State Park, 40 miles northwest. Defensible position, natural resources. 64 people could hold it better than 41. The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions, and Kai saw the temptation warring with suspicion on their faces. Trust was a luxury that had nearly gone extinct along with everything else. "My name's Kenji Yamada," the man said finally. "Former Army Ranger, which matters less every day. These people are what's left of a community that used to be 200 strong. We've been betrayed before by people who smiled and made promises. Why should we believe you're different?" Mikhail had quietly moved to a position where his rifle could cover the negotiation, but he hadn't raised it, showing restraint that Kai appreciated. Saoirse stood by the truck, her hand near the pistol at her hip but not touching it. Everyone was ready for violence but hoping for peace, that delicate balance that defined interactions between survivor groups. Thorne took a step forward, close enough that Kenji could see his face clearly. "2 months ago, I was a city councilman who spent his days arguing about bike lane proposals," Thorne said. "Now I'm responsible for keeping 41 people alive in a world that wants them dead. I don't have energy for betrayal or deception. What I have is a plan to survive another week, another month, maybe longer. You want to survive too. The math is simple, we're stronger together than apart. But I won't force it. Take a quarter of our supplies, no violence necessary, and go your own way. Or trust me for 40 miles and we see if we can build something that lasts." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound that had become the white noise of this new world, the faint moaning of zombies drawn by the sound of vehicles and raised voices. Time wasn't on anyone's side. Every minute they stood here increased the chance that the horde pursuing them, or another one entirely, would stumble onto this gathering and make the entire negotiation moot. Kenji lowered his rifle first, a gesture that rippled through his group until weapons were pointed at the ground instead of at people. 40 miles, he said. "We give it 40 miles. But my people eat tonight from shared supplies, or this agreement ends before it starts." Thorne nodded immediately. "Indira, inventory our food stocks. Prepare enough for 64 people, tonight's meal from our supplies. Zara, work with Kenji to integrate his group into our convoy formation. Mikhail, stay alert. Everyone else, we've got 30 minutes to redistribute, reorganize, and roll out." The next half hour was a controlled frenzy of activity. Kai found himself working alongside members of Kenji's group, loading supplies and making introductions that felt surreal in their normalcy. He learned that the woman with the sniper rifle was named Isadora Ruiz, a former police marksman who'd saved her group more times than anyone could count. The man organizing their children was Dmitry Volkov, no relation to Mikhail, just a coincidence that made both men smile grimly. A schoolteacher like Kai had been, trying to maintain some sense of structure and education even as the world crumbled. Elio approached Kai with a younger boy in tow, maybe 14, skinny and nervous. "This is Rafe," Elio said. "Kenji's nephew. He's fast, good eyes. I thought maybe we could train together, scouts working in pairs." The protective way Elio positioned himself suggested he saw something of his lost younger sister in this boy, and Kai felt his throat tighten at the humanity persisting despite everything designed to crush it. As the combined convoy prepared to depart, now expanded to 6 vehicles carrying 64 souls, Kai caught Zara and Thorne in quiet conversation. He moved closer, ostensibly to check a map but really to eavesdrop. "We can't keep picking up strays," Zara was saying softly. "Resources are finite. Every person we add is another mouth to feed, another life to protect. And every person we abandon is another piece of our humanity we surrender, Thorn replied. The day we start making those calculations, weighing lives against calories, is the day we become something I don't want to be. We find another way. Zara sighed but didn't argue further, and Kai found himself respecting both positions. Survival required hard choices, but it also required holding on to the values that made survival worthwhile. The balance between the two was the tightrope they all walked daily. The expanded convoy rolled out, heading northwest toward a destination that existed more as hope than certainty. Behind them, the moans grew louder as multiple hordes converged on their previous position. Ahead, the road stretched uncertain and dangerous. But for the first time in weeks, Kai felt something besides fear and exhaustion. It might have been hope or it might have been delusion. In this world, the line between the two had become increasingly blurred. They reached the outskirts of Cascade State Park just as the weather turned. Dark clouds rolled in from the Pacific, heavy with the promise of the autumn storms that defined the region. Rain began as a drizzle, then escalated to sheets of water that reduced visibility to barely 20 feet and turned the dirt access roads into mud slicks. Saoirse navigated the lead truck with white-knuckled determination, the vehicle's tires seeking purchase on increasingly treacherous terrain. The park's main entrance was blocked by an overturned ranger station, its green walls collapsed and its windows shattered. Mikhail and Kenji led a team to clear the debris while the rest maintained security, rifles pointed outward into the rain-soaked forest. The zombies had fallen behind during the final push, the horde hampered by the same weather conditions that made the convoy's progress difficult, but everyone knew it was temporary. The undead didn't stop for storms or exhaustion. They just kept coming. Zara had identified their destination from satellite images, an old lodge on the eastern edge of the park, built into a hillside with clear sight lines and a natural water source from a nearby creek. When the convoy finally reached it 2 hours later, cold and soaked and exhausted, they found it better than expected. The lodge was 2 stories of stone and timber, designed to withstand harsh winters, with a large main hall that could accommodate their group and several smaller rooms that could serve various purposes. The windows were intact, the roof solid, and the heavy wooden doors could be reinforced with the materials they'd brought. "It's perfect," Indira said, already mentally converting one room into a medical station. "We could actually hold this." But perfection in this world was always temporary, as they discovered when Elio and Rafe returned from their perimeter scout with urgent news. The boys were breathing hard, rain dripping from their hair and fear bright in their eyes. "There's a horde coming," Elio reported. "Big one, maybe 1,000 strong. They're 3 miles south and moving this direction. We've got 2 hours, maybe 3. The brief moment of hope shattered like glass. Thorn looked around at the 64 people who trusted him to lead them to safety, at the children who didn't understand why safety kept slipping through their fingers, at the elderly who were too tired to run anymore. "We fortify," he said simply. "This is where we make our stand." What followed was the most frantic construction work Kai had ever participated in. Saoirse directed teams to reinforce the doors and ground floor windows with the steel plating they'd salvaged. Mikhail and Kenji established firing positions and kill zones, calculating angles and fields of fire with grim expertise. Indira set up her medical station with the efficient pessimism of someone expecting casualties. Zara worked with the children, moving them to the second floor and teaching them to stay quiet, stay calm, stay alive. Kai found himself on a team with Isadora and Dimitri, boarding up windows and creating firing slits that would allow them to shoot out while minimizing exposure. His hands worked automatically, driving nails and positioning boards, while his mind cataloged everything that could go wrong. 1,000 zombies against 64 humans. The math wasn't favorable. But the math never had been, not since this nightmare began. The rain intensified, thunder rumbling across the valley like artillery fire. It was Rafe who first spotted them, dark shapes emerging from the tree line, hundreds upon hundreds of shambling figures drawn by some instinct or sense that prey was near. The boy didn't scream, didn't panic. He simply turned to the nearest adult and said, "They're here," with the flat acceptance of a child who'd seen too much. Thorn's voice carried through the lodge, calm and clear. "Everyone to positions. Conserve ammunition. Controlled shots, headshots only. We've survived worse than this." It was a lie, they hadn't survived worse than this, but it was the lie they needed. The first wave hit the lodge's perimeter as darkness fell, the zombies surging forward with the mindless determination that characterized the older infected. Gunfire erupted from windows and firing slits, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Kai sighted down his rifle, breathed out and squeezed the trigger. A zombie dropped, a hole where its left eye had been. He shifted, found another target, fired again. Beside him, Isadora worked with mechanical precision. Each shot a kill, no wasted ammunition. The zombies climbed over their fallen, bodies piling up as the defenders fired and fired and fired. Kai's shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, his ears rang despite the improvised protection, and his eyes burned from the smoke of spent gunpowder. Time became fluid, seconds stretching into hours, hours compressing into moments. He reloaded, fired, each action a meditation that kept terror at bay. Then something changed. The zombies pulled back, not retreating but regrouping, and in the brief lull, Kai heard Zara's sharp intake of breath. "No," she whispered, her binoculars trained on the horde. "Oh no." "What?" Thorn demanded, moving to her position. "They're adapting," Zara said, her voice hollow. "Look at them. They're not just mindlessly attacking. They're probing our defenses, looking for weak points. And there, in the center, do you see it? That group moving together, almost coordinated. I think some of them are controlling the others, directing the horde." Kai looked where she indicated and felt his blood run cold. She was right. A cluster of zombies near the horde's center moved with purpose, and the surrounding undead seemed to respond to their movements. It was rudimentary, nothing like true intelligence, but it was so much more than they'd shown before. Evolution in real time, horror adapting to overcome obstacles. The second wave was smarter. The zombies focused on the lodge's western wall, where Saoirse had warned the reinforcement was weakest. They pushed and pulled at the boards, and when gunfire drove them back, others immediately took their place. It was coordinated attrition and it was working. "We can't hold," Kenji said flatly, his rifle overheating from continuous fire. "Not against this. We need a new plan." Mikhail was already moving, barking orders. "Fall back to second floor. We funnel them through the stairwell, create a choke point. We can hold a choke point." The retreat was controlled chaos, people grabbing essential supplies and scrambling up the lodge's central staircase while the rear guard maintained fire. Kai helped carry a child who'd frozen in fear, her small body trembling against his chest. He passed her to her mother on the second floor and returned to his firing position, each shot now a desperate attempt to buy seconds. The western wall failed at midnight, boards splintering inward with a crack like bones breaking. Zombies poured through the gap, and the lodge's main hall became a slaughterhouse. The stairwell became their Thermopylae, a narrow passage where Mikhail and Kenji held the line with a rotating team of defenders. The zombies could only climb two abreast, and the concentrated fire created a wall of destroyed bodies that the next wave had to climb. Kai took his turn in the rotation, his world narrowing to the sight picture of his rifle, the undead faces emerging from darkness, the trigger pull that ended their mockery of life. His ammunition ran low. Everyone's did. Elio appeared beside him with spare magazines scrounged from the dead and the wounded. The boy's face was spattered with blood, not his own, and his hands shook, but he smiled with the manic courage of the young. "We're still here," Elio said, as if reminding himself of a fundamental truth. "Still fighting." But fighting had a cost. Isadora took a bite to the forearm when a fast mover surged up the stairs faster than anticipated. She shot the zombie point blank, then looked at her wound with clinical detachment. 20 minutes before I turn," she said calmly, checking her watch. "Maybe 30. I'll stay on the line until then." She did, firing with perfect precision until the infection reached her brain and Kenji put her down with a single shot, tears streaming down his scarred face. Dimitri died protecting the children when 3 zombies broke through a second-floor window that everyone thought too high to reach. He used his body as a shield, absorbed bites that would have killed the kids and kept fighting until blood loss took him. His last words were in Russian, something that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene against the carnage, the zombie assault finally faltered. The horde had exhausted itself against the lodge's defenses, the undead now a field of corpses surrounding the building. The survivors who remained, 41 now, the group reduced back to its original number through violence and sacrifice, emerged onto the second-floor balcony in stunned silence. "We held," Thorn said, his voice ragged. "We actually held." But the victory felt hollow. Kai looked at the faces around him, exhausted, traumatized, marked by losses that could never be recovered. They'd survived, but pieces of themselves had died in that long night. How many more nights could they endure before nothing remained of the people they'd been? Zara stood apart from the group, her binoculars trained on the horizon. When she lowered them, her expression was troubled. The horde didn't just attack randomly, she said. They were driven here. Something's pushing the zombies north, concentrating them. I saw it in the movement patterns. What could drive 1,000 zombies in one direction? Indira asked, binding wounds with their dwindling medical supplies. Another horde, Zara replied. A bigger one. And if it's pushing this direction. She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Saoirse was already running calculations, her engineering mind seeking solutions to impossible problems. We can't outrun another assault. Not here. But 10 miles north there's a mountain pass. Narrow, easily defensible. If we could reach it, create a permanent fortification. If, Mikhail said quietly. The most dangerous word in any language. Elio was sitting with Rafe, the two boys holding each other and crying for friends they'd lost, for a world they barely remembered. Kai sat down beside them, putting his arms around both, offering the inadequate comfort of presence. We keep going, he told them softly. That's what we do. We survive, we remember, and we keep going. But privately, in the part of his mind that still taught history lessons to students who no longer existed, Kai wondered if they were witnessing humanity's final chapter. Every battle won seemed to cost more than they could afford. Every mile gained led to another last stand. The zombies would never stop coming, never tire, never surrender. How long could human courage hold against an endless tide of death? Thorne called the survivors together in the lodge's main hall, now stained with blood and littered with shell casings. We rest here for 2 days, he announced. We bury our dead, tend our wounded, and rebuild our strength. Then we move north toward the mountain pass. We build something that lasts, something that survives. Or we die trying. Those are the options we have, and I won't lie to you, both might lead to the same end. But we choose how we face that end. We choose to stay human. As the group dispersed to their tasks, burial details, medical care, fortification repairs, Kai found himself on the balcony again, looking out at the morning sun rising over a world of corpses. In the distance, almost too far to see, he thought he detected movement. Another horde, perhaps, or just his traumatized mind creating patterns from shadows. Zara joined him, her tablet clutched to her chest like a talisman. I've been mapping the horde movements trying to find a pattern, she said. And I found one. They're moving away from the coast. Driven inland by something. But here's what doesn't make sense. They're moving in an arc like they're avoiding something. Or surrounding something. What's at the center? Kai asked, though part of him didn't want to know. I can't tell from the data I have. But whatever it is, it's affecting zombie behavior over hundreds of miles. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What if this isn't the end, Kai? What if it's still the beginning? The question hung between them, terrifying in its implications. Below, people went about the grim work of survival, each small action an act of defiance against oblivion. Children's laughter rose from somewhere inside, Elio and Rafe playing a hand game, finding joy in the cracks of despair. Indira sang softly as she worked, a Hindi melody Kai didn't recognize but found beautiful. Mikhail cleaned his rifle with ritualistic care, preparing for the next battle because there was always a next battle. They were 41 humans in a world of billions of dead. They were exhausted, traumatized, running on hope and stubbornness. They had lost so much and would lose more. But they were still here, still fighting, still choosing to be human in a world that rewarded monstrosity. Kai thought about his students, the teenagers he'd taught about historical resilience, about civilizations that fell and rose again, about humanity's stubborn refusal to surrender to darkness. He taught them that history was written by survivors. Now he was learning that survival itself was the writing, each day a word, each choice a sentence, each small victory a paragraph in a story whose ending remained unwritten. We'll keep the chronicle, he said suddenly. Document everything, who we were, who we've become, what we've learned. So if we fall, someone after might find it. Might know we were here, we fought, we mattered. Zara nodded slowly. The Human Chronicles, she said. Tales of bravery, strategy, and survival in a world dominated by zombies. I'll help you write it. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, the survivors of Cascade Lodge began their 2 days of rest. They didn't know what waited in the mountain passes to the north. They didn't know if the strange pattern Zara had discovered meant hope or horror. They didn't know if their story would end in triumph or tragedy. But they knew they would face it together, these humans who had found each other in the ashes of civilization. And in the not knowing, in the uncertainty that stretched before them like an unmarked road, they found a strange and terrible freedom. The freedom to choose their own ending, to write their own final chapter. In the lodge's quietest room, Away from the others, Kai found a blank notebook in his pack. He opened it to the first page and wrote in careful letters, Day 127 of the outbreak. We are still here. Against all odds, despite all losses, we endure. This is our chronicle. This is our testimony. We are the last remnants of a world that was, and perhaps the first seeds of a world that will be. We are afraid. We are broken. We are human. And we are not finished yet. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of moaning from the next horde, the next threat, the next test of their survival. But it also carried the laughter of children who still played, the songs of healers who still hoped, the quiet conversations of soldiers who still planned for tomorrow. The story wasn't over. It had simply turned another page, and what would be written there remained a mystery, dark and uncertain, terrible and beautiful, ending and beginning all at once.